Welcome to this explainer. Look, today we're taking the ISO 14001:2026 guidelines and transforming them into a highly strategic framework built specifically for lead auditors. We're skipping the dry regulatory text entirely. Instead, we're going to look at how top-tier auditors actually assess an environmental management system out in the wild. Let's just jump right in and confront the biggest trap auditors fall into with Clause 4. You know the drill. It's incredibly easy to walk into a facility, ask for their context register, glance at a quick list of external and internal issues, and just tick the box. But let me ask you a serious question. Are you just checking boxes, or are you auditing their actual environmental strategy? Because, frankly, there is a massive difference between an auditor who's just hunting for a signed piece of paper and one who really investigates the true context of an organization. A checklist audit is completely static, right? It basically treats the environment like some annoying administrative hurdle. But a strategic audit? That is dynamic. It evaluates whether the organization is actually proactively managing real-world environmental risks and opportunities based on their specific, unique context. So, to help shift our mindset today, we're going to cover a few key things. Moving beyond the checklist audit, decoding context with Annex A.3, mapping stakeholders via Annex 8.4, triangulating the evidence, and evaluating strategic EMS planning. We're basically going to explore exactly how to use 8.3 and 8.4 as interpretive lenses to pinpoint an organization's true strategic position. All right, Section 1, Beyond the Checklist Audit, Shifting the Auditor Mindset. Let's start by looking at why Clause 4, the context of the organization, is literally the anchor for the entire environmental management system. I mean, everything from operational controls to leadership commitment flows directly from how well an organization understands its own context. Just take a look at the breakdown of common nonconformities we're seeing. See that massive 60% chunk? That represents a total failure to link stakeholder expectations to actual environmental objectives. And that 25% slice? That's organizations treating their context as a one-time paperwork exercise that gets shoved in a dusty drawer until the next audit rolls around. But the environment is constantly changing, right? So their context analysis has to evolve right along with it. Now, while Clause 4 lays out the mandatory requirements for understanding internal and external issues, let's be honest, the clause alone can feel a little abstract. So to get beyond that checklist mentality, a great lead auditor relies heavily on the annexes, specifically Annex A.3 and A.4. You really shouldn't view these annexes as rigid rules used to punish organizations. Instead, think of them as essential interpretive tools. They would actually uncover the true intent of the standard. Moving right along to Section 2, Decoding Context with Annex A.3, Identifying Environmental Conditions. Let's grab our first investigative tool, Annex A.3, and see how it builds our understanding of environmental context. So context is not just economic or operational. The actual physical environment is a core piece of an organization's strategic reality. Annex A.3 makes it super clear that organizations have to consider dynamic environmental conditions. We're talking about things like climate change, biodiversity impacts, and resource scarcity, factors that can affect their operations or, conversely, that their operations can affect. Let's look at a practical example directly from our source material. Say you're auditing a coastal logistics company. If they only list something basic like fuel consumption as their environmental context, they're totally missing the big picture. Annex A.3 tells you, the auditor, to look way past that. You need to dig in and investigate if they've actually accounted for dynamic risks like sea level rise, infrastructure vulnerability, or extreme weather disruptions, because that is their true contextual reality. All right, Section 3, Mapping Stakeholders via Annex A.4, Identifying Interested Parties. Now we need to flip the coin and look at Annex A.4, which really expands our view of who actually cares about these environmental conditions. Stakeholders are incredibly dynamic. Historically, companies would just list regulators and customers and call it a day. But Annex A.4 explicitly broadens that scope. Interested parties now include local communities, investors, insurers, NGOs, and importantly, the expectations of all these groups are going to evolve over time. Take a chemical manufacturing plant, for instance. A basic run-of-the-mill audit might just verify that they've jotted down regulatory authorities on a list. But a strategic auditor? They're using Annex A.4 to verify if the plant has also considered the surrounding community's concerns about air quality, or maybe their investors' concerns about environmental risk exposure. Honestly, if a local community is terrified about emissions, but the facility hasn't even identified them as an interested party, their entire Clause 4 foundation is cracked. Which brings us to Section 4, triangulating the evidence. Cross-referencing A.3 and A.4. Okay, this is where the magic really happens for a lead auditor. We're bringing the physical environmental realities and the stakeholder expectations together. Think of yourself as a strategic detective here. You simply cannot look at data points in isolation. You have to triangulate these two distinct signals to find the truth. You're combining Annex A.3, the environmental conditions, with Annex A.4, the interested parties. Doing this is exactly how you assess if their Clause 4 context requirements are genuinely being met. Rule of thumb, if they have a major environmental condition, there is almost certainly a stakeholder out there who cares about it. This triangulation matrix here is fantastic. It shows exactly how an auditor maps a physical environmental condition directly to the stakeholders who care about it, and then finally to the strategic alignment in the EMS itself. Just look at the middle row for a second. If Annex A.3 identifies water scarcity in their region, then Annex A.4 absolutely should identify the local community as an interested party. And the strategic alignment? The EMS needs to feature clear water conservation targets. Boom. That is how you audit strategy, not just checklists. So when you're out there in the field, just follow these 3 investigative steps. First, figure out what environmental conditions exist. Second, figure out who cares about them. And third, verify that the organization's objectives and operational controls are actively addressing those intersections. You're basically making sure their policies aren't just empty corporate speak, but are actually solving real-world challenges. Now let's move to our final section. Section 5, Evaluating Strategic EMS Planning, Proving the System Works. Let's see how triangulating all this evidence allows us to evaluate the actual big-picture strategic planning of the entire environmental management system. To truly prove strategic integration is happening, you have to triangulate your audit evidence using 3 key field techniques. You're comparing what the documents say, things like their context registers and risk assessments, with what the leadership team actually tells you in interviews. And then you compare both of those with what you physically observe out on the facility floor. Because if the documents say they care deeply about chemical spills, but the operators you interview have 0 clue about the emergency procedures, well, you've just found a massive systemic disconnect. And this is why the value you bring to an organization when you audit for strategic impact is just undeniable. By combining Annex A.3 and A.4 to assess Clause 4, you're going to generate much higher quality nonconformity reports. You're highlighting real gaps in their strategic alignment. And ultimately, that pushes the organization toward genuine sustainability impact rather than just helping them pass some annual administrative test. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that these annexes are not rigid, prescriptive rules. They're essential interpretive tools. By truly understanding the intent behind their context and their stakeholders, you unlock the full power of the ISO 14001 framework. It allows you to exercise professional judgment in a way that truly, genuinely helps the organizations you audit. So, I'm going to leave you with a provocative thought to challenge how you approach your very next lead audit assessment. Next time someone hands you their context register, are you going to just accept a static checklist? Or are you going to use Annex A.3 and A.4 to investigate their true dynamic context? Because that choice completely dictates the value you bring to the table as an auditor. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and hey, happy auditing!